Okay, we're going to try a live to tape. I'm experimenting with some new software and I just want to see how it works out. So, this isn't technically a live stream, but I'm going to treat it as one. I've noticed there's a certain pattern emerging in terms of how our governments have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic and now how they seem to be responding to a new threat. And that threat, according to our government, is mis and disinformation. Um, in terms of the pandemic, the way that we've responded, um, in my mind, has fallen short on several levels. Probably the biggest one is right out of the gate. It seems that the authorities did not want to engage in an open debate or public discussion about the nature of the pandemic and what an appropriate response to it would be. This has been a concern of mine pretty much since the beginning. I mean, in those first few weeks, I'll admit that it was very unknown. And for a short period of time, for everyone to stay home as much as possible and not interact with people was not an unreasonable response, in my opinion. But as the weeks wore on, it seemed pretty clear that we weren't going to have a discussion, but rather it was our governmental authorities who were going to tell us what to do. And I think the thinking by many Canadians was that we're in an emergency. Now is no time to be debating and discussing this. We need to just act. We need to act quickly. We need to act decisively. We need to act in unison. And anyone who spoke out was basically not playing along or not helping for the common good. Um, I think that's sort of the wrong approach. And I think as this plays out, it's becoming more and more clear. But irrespective of how it's turned out, I think for something that complex in a democracy, we need to have a discussion. And I think the way the reasoning went, although they didn't necessarily say it this explicitly, but the reasoning went something like this. Is there a virus out there? Yes. Is this virus potentially dangerous? Yes. Would lockdowns and other restrictions, is it reasonable to assume that lockdowns and other restrictions would curb the spread? Yes, that's a reasonable expectation. Do we want to curb the spread? Yes. And then we conclude, therefore, lockdowns and restrictions make sense. Of course, that's not the proper calculus for a governmental policy or a policy that's going to affect everyone because it's not a unidimensional thing. It's something that affects so many more facets in life, as we're seeing. It affects the economy, certainly. It affects mental health. It affects children's education. It affects sort of public discourse and how we view one another. So I don't think we know the extent even now. So instead of just looking at how do we stop the spread and looking just at that one category, we fail to weigh the costs. And what should have happened, the debate or the line of reasoning should have gone something like this. Is this virus real? Yes. Is it potentially dangerous? Yes. Might lockdowns and other restrictions slow the spread? Yes. Might those same policies come with some costs? Absolutely. Would it be reasonable then to discuss those costs, debate those costs, and then try to find a reasonable response that maximizes safety while minimizing impact? Or maybe those aren't quite the right words, but finds the best trade-off, if you will. Just like if you're shopping for something, there's what you're getting and what you're spending. So there could be product A might be the best product to do the thing that you want it to do. But if product B is almost as good, but it's half the price, that might be your better value. So maybe there was policies we could have taken that would have protected our safety to a reasonable degree, but not have had the impact. But that's not what happened. We didn't have that discussion. In fact, what we did instead was we made it very clear that the health authorities were going to tell us what to do. Any health authority or any doctor or other medical profession or anyone really who has an opinion, those opinions got pushed to the side. Our mainstream news media carried a very specific narrative, and anyone who spoke out against it was branded fringe or someone with unacceptable views, the idea being that they are just discussing these things would have been dangerous. So that's not how we want to respond. And I say all this not because of the pandemic, although certainly that's a concern of mine, but we seem to be getting into something new here. And I'll show you this clip that our foreign affairs minister was speaking the other day. Let's see if I can find it. And she's speaking at a Commons committee here. I'll just play this here. So you can, actually, that's not the right one. Oh, it's right here. Right there. This is why I'm doing a dry run. Okay, let's see if this works.
War information is key because it justifies why you start war. And what we've seen since the beginning of this war, well, before the war, there was a big propaganda campaign because we were saying that there were troops that were getting organized around Ukraine, and Russia was saying no, that's not the case, and clearly they lied to our face and to the world. Afterwards, they said that the reason why they were sending troops to further invade Ukraine was to denazify the country. While we know Zelensky himself is. They were saying Luhansk and Donetsk regions. There was a genocide happening. It's extremely not only false, but it's clear manipulation. And also, since then, they've been engaging in more and more propaganda. And we know that it is happening regarding in Ukraine and in Russia, but at the same time, it's happening in our democracies. We've banned RT and Sputnik on the broadcasting side. We've pushed digital platforms to also ban them. But we need to do more. And Canada is chairing two important coalitions this year, the Freedom Online Coalition and the Media Freedom Coalition. And our mandate, and my mandate as foreign minister, is really to counter propaganda online. Social media companies need to do more. They need to make sure that they recognize that states have jurisdictions over them, that they're not technological platforms, but they're content producers. And it is our way collectively to make sure that we can really be able to have strong democracies in the future, because this war is being fought with 21st century tools, including social media.
So here her concern, and she's talking obviously in the context of the, I'm going to stop sharing that. She's talking in the context of the Ukraine war, and she's saying that one of the problems is Russia is spreading propaganda. And I don't doubt for a moment that Russia is indeed spreading propaganda. But similar to the pandemic, we need to look at the cost here. So what she's certainly alluding to is that part of the problem is social media, and she's alluding to governments controlling social media. Looking back at the pandemic, and even now, I was, again, let me see if I can share this here. Just for fun, I looked at, this is YouTube's medical misinformation policy, which is as of today. So right now on YouTube, there's still certain things that you cannot say as it pertains to COVID-19. Specifically, what does it say here? Basically, if you say things that contradict the local health authorities or the World Health Organization, that's going to be offside. So already, social media platforms are preventing people from sharing freely. Now, it seems like our foreign affairs minister wants even more restrictions on social media platforms. And this to me is chilling, because again, I think what the argument here, and we should watch for this because I think it's going to be coming out more and more in the coming weeks. The argument that I think we're going to be hearing goes something like this. Is there misinformation from Russia and other bad actors? Yes. Can misinformation cause harm? It can. It can mislead people. It can confuse people. It can have harmful impacts on people, I suppose. And then we jump right, therefore, and do we want harm? And the answer, of course, is no, we don't want harm. Therefore, We should allow our governments to decide what it is we see. And again, if you're looking just unidimensionally, I guess that reasoning makes sense. But of course, there's so much more to consider. There are costs that come with having our governments censor what we see. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this. Obviously, like the first one is who gets to decide what it is we get to see. Is it cabinet? Is it Minister Joly? Is it Trudeau? Is it some bureaucrat? Is it the CRTC? Who gets to decide? And what recourse would we have against those censors? If, like, just by definition, as soon as you give someone the power to decide what we're allowed to see or we're allowed to talk about, if they are acting malevolently, which they, I mean, any human being can act that way. We're all subject to becoming corrupt. Unfortunately, I believe we're all faulty and we can all make bad decisions. So if that censorship board starts misbehaving and we want to call attention to that, they're the very ones who have the power to shut down any dissent about them. So that's a chilling thing to consider. I think it's already pretty bad. Just looking at the pandemic, we couldn't talk about certain things. You couldn't talk about a lab leak hypothesis for the longest time. You couldn't question the efficacies of vaccines. And this is important because these are complex things. Foreign wars are complicated. As soon as you have countries and societies, those are complex issues. Now, you wouldn't, again, I have no idea what's going on in Ukraine, frankly. I don't know much about that part of the world. I'm quite ignorant. But what I do see is that our news media is painting a cartoonish picture, really, that we have Zelensky, who is, the hero of this, and he's perfect and he's charming. And then we have Putin, who's the anti-hero, he's the villain. And again, I don't know much about either of these men, but I know human nature is even the worst villains have some redeeming qualities, and even our heroes have blind spots and shortcomings. So, but it's painted so unidimensionally again. On that topic, I don't know if I have it here. No, I didn't create this, but Oliver Stone made a movie about Ukraine, or documentary from 2014. I watched it the other night. It's interesting. And I don't, I can take or leave Oliver Stone. I think he's a decent filmmaker. I'm not no expert in his filmmaking or his politics. And this film, it was informative, it was interesting. And without getting into the material of it, what I came away with it is whatever was going on in Ukraine between Russia back in 2014, it's complicated. That's one thing. Like, there's different governments and people are overthrowing one another, and it goes back to World War II and the Cold War and all these things and different factions. And again, it doesn't paint like it's evil and Russia is perfect or anything like that. It's these are human beings, that it's a complicated geography. It's got a complicated history, and that it sort of rings true enough to me that things are complicated. Is Canada perfectly good or perfectly evil? Well, of course, it's complicated. I think Canada is, on balance, a very good country and noble country. That doesn't mean we don't have our, dark history as well. There's things that we need to reflect on in our own history, and that's true of any country in the world. Anyway, I'm just concerned that the narrative here is misinformation harmful? And yes, it is. I'll grant that. But I think the cure for misinformation could be far more harmful and more dangerous because, again, who do we put in charge? So watch these things, pay attention, because I think we're going to be hearing that argument from our NDP Liberal coalition government. And I'm just worried that Canadians won't have access to more information. I mean, I never watched RT, which I didn't even realize it was Russian. I think I've seen some of their stuff just on YouTube, like maybe years ago. And I went searching for it just when I found out it was banned. And it's probably propaganda, but there's a lot on the airways here in Canada that is clearly propaganda. I think of CBC, CTV, and I'm not calling that they should be banned. I mean, I think I mean, I don't think our federal government should be funding them, but that's beside the point. But I think the way the way a liberal democracy deals with misinformation is we let all parties share their opinions, share their ideas, and hopefully through public discourse, we can sort through that and we can see for ourselves which ones make sense, which ones stand up to scrutiny, which ones have evidence, which ones stand up to reason, and hopefully those narratives will emerge. Now, does that mean all people will get the right answer every time? Of course not. We're multiple people and we each can form our own opinions, but at least by having access to that raw information, we can do our best to wade through it. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and not having censorship, these are important pillars to any Western democracy. Canadians need to keep an eye on this and speak out about any curtailment of those rights and those freedoms. Thanks for watching.